Okay.
Okay.
Let's start.
It's the right book.
It's the right book.
The right program.
It's the right speaking.
It's the right speech.
Imagine that I start making publicity for the wrong book here. Oh.
No, please.
Too many publications.
Yeah. Problem. Luxury.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming to this event, to this launch of our book and this event on intra-EU mobility and short-term intra-EU mobility. I'm really happy to present the panel here for the first session. And I will first give the floor to our research director, Bart van Herke, to give a formal welcome and introduction. And then we'll go straight into the presentations and the talks. And then we have a policy panel after the break, which should be very interesting as well. So, Bart, please.
Thank you very much, Wouter, and good morning, no, good afternoon by now, all of you. It's been an intense Monday as you gather. Very happy to begin with Wave, this new book. That's the privilege of the director of the research department, to wave the new books. It's still warm, it just came off the press. Well, not literally this morning, but very recently. And it deals, of course, with the ongoing challenges for short-term intra-EU mobility. And that's why we're here. Happy to see so many of you in the room, and then I think more than 30 participants online. So we have a good crowd for today's exchange. So first of all, of course, I want to congratulate the editors of the book, Mehtap and Wouter, for nailing this amongst so many other commitments and obligations at work. And of course, I want to also extend my gratitude to the authors. Some of them are here, some of them the other side of the room, some of them online. And so we will be listening to several of the contributors to the book today. So it's really a pleasure to just formally open today's discussion about short-term intra-EU labor mobility, which is, of course, and I guess that's why you're here, an important topic for European labor markets and therefore also for policymakers, trade union organizations, and those research centers who inspire the trade union movement, such as the ETUI. And just one very quick illustration that I think all of us know and remember is during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we saw that certain industries, or several industries actually, were really struggling with labor market shortages. Food processing, agriculture, you know, that they heavily rely on such short-term and seasonal work and workers. And they illustrate the challenges of these sectors, including with regard to poor living conditions, low wages, limited social protection, and you will find ample illustrations in the book, which I won't flag again, but now you've seen it and you have copies at the entrance, of course. Now, I think this book will feed into and will inspire the policy debate about the topic. To begin with, and I think we will hear about that already in the opening panel in a moment, because it really flags the importance of the need to define and measure short-term intra-EU mobility. The lack of a clear definition makes it, of course, difficult to track and regulate. No data, no progress, as some have put it. Some workers, and again, all this is described in detail in the book, some workers move just for a few months, return to their homes. Other workers work across borders, but then maintain their residence in another country, etc. So I think the call for clarity, for good definitions, data collection efforts are clearly flagged. They have improved, data collection has improved, but there is still a lot of work to be done there. And when you go through this book, that becomes even more clear. Now, a second contribution that I would like to flag with regard to this book is that it clearly maps the labor market challenges of intra-EU mobility. Of course, on paper, intra-EU movers enjoy free movement, and in practice, they often face lower job security, lesser wages, poor career opportunities, etc., etc. Seasonal and posted workers are particularly vulnerable to exploitation. There are language barriers. There is the lack of qualification recognition, discrimination, etc., which really hinder their integration on the labor market, leading to skills waste, where highly qualified workers are employed in low skill jobs. And I have to admit that the last time when I took a taxi in Sofia, I was quite shocked that several of the taxi drivers actually were university professors. Same thing in Bratislava, where you have business owners and other very highly skilled people driving around with taxis at night, downgrading that represents a missed opportunity for Europe very clearly. Now, finally, the book also talks about strengthening policy, strengthening regulation. Stronger labor protection and better data collection are essential. Seasonal workers in agriculture, tourism often lack the same rights as permanent employees, and it's very clear from this book, the underlying message is that the EU has to balance labor market flexibility with worker protection. Now, final point, before I hand back to Wouter, I have to admit that I really learned some things in there what I had absolutely no idea about, including Anna Krasteva's chapter on digital nomads. I have to admit I was very naive on this topic. And so in this chapter it's very nicely explained, and also in other chapters, how cross-border work becomes more and more complex, remote work from abroad, digital nomadism reshaping mobility patterns. It's maybe not a huge phenomenon, but I think I agree with Anna that it is an increasingly important phenomenon. And so regulatory changes such as taxation, social security, should address these issues because they're running a bit behind the fact. So I hope that when you flick through this, even better, when you read this, you will, as it was the case for me, feel that there is a need for action on the topic, even though I have to admit that any social or labor market initiative, of course, at the present moment in the EU is going to be messy and complicated, but still all the arguments are there because, of course, we know that intra-EU mobility is on the one hand vital for economic integration. The EU cannot do without it, and this type of mobility continues to expose some workers to vulnerability and risks for exploitation, and we cannot close our eyes for that. But I want to be optimistic. Hope this afternoon's discussion will feed into the policy debate. That's our ambition at the European Trade Union Institute, and I'm happy to pass it back to Wouter, to Mehtap, to Frederick, and to Anna for, I hope, a very interesting panel. And I will, at some point, discreetly go and sit there in the front row so that I can listen to the exchanges. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Bart. Now we will discuss a little bit some of the content of the book, which Bart has already very kindly introduced. So, in this discussion, we are just aiming to give some highlights, not the entire content, because there is no time for that. But we are joined here by three of the authors in person, who will each go a bit deeper into their chapters with presentations of 8 to 10 minutes. And then we will also have some of the country chapter authors joining us online to really give a sort of elevator pitch in 3 minutes of their chapters, just to give you all an idea of what's contained in the book. And then there will be some time for discussion and debates as well. So I will give the floor first to my co-editor and co-author Mehtap. Many thanks for the great collaboration. And she will give an overview of the chapter we did in the book as a whole. You have 10 minutes, Mehtap, and I'll give you a sign after 8.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Yeah. Thank you, Wouter. Thank you, everyone, for being here for this book launch that we are very happy to share with you. I don't think I need to go back to the motivation because Bart rightly raised, because we've reflected also with him about how we started this whole project. But what was striking for us was that there has been a lot of anecdotal rumors, evidence about the working conditions and vulnerabilities that was faced by some of the intra-EU mobile workers, particularly short-term temporary ones. And we realized that we didn't have sufficient evidence out there, neither data nor research, that could enlighten us more. So we said maybe we have to do something about it. And this was one of the key motivations, because compared to the, let's say, the vast literature on third country migration, there is much less if you look at the intra-EU migration. So that was one of the striking things that was a motivating factor. Yeah, it works. So yeah, we decided to have a systematic look at this issue, and we also realized quickly after that there was a reason why there wasn't a vast literature on that, because there is not enough data. So most of the time, these intra-EU mobile workers are escaping the statistics or surveys, so we cannot measure exactly, especially when they are there for short term. And as we cannot measure them, we cannot also analyze their labor market outcomes or the impacts on the sending or receiving countries. So that was another challenge that we faced right after or at the onset of this project. But of course, we couldn't give up and do nothing about it, because there was some emerging case studies and as I said, some anecdotal evidence that in some specific sectors, as Bart also mentioned, it came even more obvious with the pandemic, the terrible working conditions. We put together an interesting set of experts and from different fields. So we covered economics, law, sociology, and political science, to put our brains together to see what we can find out at the EU level, but also in some member states, which especially are home to such mobilities, labor mobility. So the end of this exercise, a couple of workshops, internal brainstorming, has been the result. The result has been this book, as you can see, and what it highlights in very few words is that there are data issues, and these data issues are very important because if we don't have them, we don't exactly know how many people are moving from one country to another in the EU, and what are the sizes or the directions from where to where. And as I said also before, we also need to understand how they perform once they go to another country, so that we can inform policymaking and perhaps improve regulation or legislation if it is missing. So some of the chapters are at the EU level, and some of them are focusing more on some specific member states, as I said, and we'll hear from them in a second. But the key findings, I'll be very short here, is that we found a lot of variation, especially for mobile workers by their different origins. So there is quite a bit of heterogeneity given where these people come from and how they perform or how they are received in the destination countries. They often, very often times, experience worse labor market outcomes compared to the majority or the reference group in the countries where they migrate to or land in. And particularly, the working conditions are quite worrying for posted workers and seasonal workers. And despite the lack of legal hurdles, those intra-EU movers are still, in some cases, quite similar to third country migrants in terms of their labor market outcomes. And that was very surprising for us to show evidence on. So that's for now all for the overall book. And I will just, in the next 3-4 minutes, just go through our chapter that we wrote with Wouter on the EU level. It's an empirical chapter where we try to show some of the flows of intra-EU mobile citizens with the limited data that we could find. It's not perfect to measure this kind of mobility, but we did our best with the given information. And then show you a picture about how their labor market outcomes look like. So the first picture is about the flows of different types of individuals into the EU on an annual basis. So this picture is telling you that the non-EU migration on an annual basis still constitutes the largest flows to the EU countries, But posted workers are also quite significant on an annual basis again. And the intra-EU mobility, so this is the people who move from one EU country to another, are substantially less in terms of flows compared to the third country migrants, but they have a stable path, let's say, and there has been a bit of fluctuation around the pandemic. The second picture is, maybe I won't have time for this, but it's in the book to show some directional flows. Okay, so this is to give you an idea of how many people move from which region to which regions, and we have aggregated Western, Eastern a little bit there to give you a taste of how these mobility flows are moving and to where. But I think what is even more interesting to share with you today is this quick snapshot of the labor market outcomes of those intra-EU mobile workers when they go to another EU country. So here we looked at three indicators, and the first one is the employment. So the purple, yeah, they are purple. The purple part is for average, not distinguishing between the origins of those people, but for an average intra-EU migrant. So when we look at the employment outcomes of these people compared to the majority population, we see that they are 5 percentage points less likely to be employed compared to the reference group. So there's already a first employment penalty for intra-EU movers on average. And this gap is different depending on the origins, and it's worse for some intra-EU movers, for example, from Baltics, than for others, which is a bit less. But on balance, we see a negative employment outcome. The second indicator is the occupational status. This is a sort of ranking individuals in terms of their occupation using information from their income and education, and suggests that intra-EU movers, short-term intra-EU movers, are also more likely to have lower occupational status than the average or than the reference group in the countries they migrate to. Similarly, worse outcome is observed when we look at the imputed earnings. So they tend to earn almost 10% less than the native-born reference group in the countries where they are. So these are quite striking. So the purple one, as I said, is the average, but if you go into specific movers from certain origins, some of the results are less bad, but some of them are quite strikingly high. So that's the main picture that we got in a nutshell. So what do we do once we see this kind of striking results? So we start to ask ourselves the question, so these people are supposed to have no legal hurdles and when they go to another country, but it seems that something is, and I maybe forgot to mention it, but all these gaps that I showed you in terms of, or worse outcomes that I showed you, this is taken into account their socioeconomic background and age, education. So these are compared, similar people are compared to each other. And despite having those qualifications, they end up with those results. So this is quite striking. So some friction or some sort of lack of transferability of skills, as you said, is happening there, but it's difficult to quantify or identify those things without better data. And also what these results show is that the benefits of moving within the EU doesn't look like it's accruing in the same way for everyone. So there are some winners, if I can say it this way, and some of them are actually downgraded in terms of their occupational status, even though some, we have also seen this in another work that complements this book, is that, for example, for an EU migrant, it could be occupationally worse to move, but in terms of absolute income, they might still be better off if they had stayed. So there's also this kind of dynamics that play a role. It's, again, difficult to generalize, but overall the results are in this direction, and something is going on that we need to understand why we see these gaps despite freedom of movement. Then I will leave it, I guess, for the afternoon and perhaps for questions about labor shortage implications. It looks like it's addressing intra-EU mobility, some part of shortages, but if the working conditions are so bad for some workers, it cannot be a full remedy, or it has some cost for sure. if it's continuing this way. So I'll stop here. I see Wouter gesturing, but I'm happy to elaborate further if you have specific questions. Also, Wouter can step in any moment. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I was discreetly gesturing. So thank you very much. Now we're going to have our first intervention online by Professor Nelly de Mirva. For all time's sake, we've included the UK as part of the EU. Well, it's more nostalgia, but it's still very interesting to also see the perspective from the UK. So Nelly is a professor at the University of Essex and director of the Migration Centre there. And she will very briefly, in 3 minutes, and I will keep time, give an overview of what they find in the chapter. Nelly, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Wouter and Mehtap, for together with Dr. Marina Fernandez Reino. And I am delighted to be here and to be joining you from from the UK, and that the UK is indeed in the book. So I very much count on Wouter that he'll stop me when there is need for that. Okay, so let me give you a little bit about, and I want to mention basically the context in which this book has been written, and I guess this is a very similar context for all the different chapters. So I think in that sense it's quite important to highlight it. So there are growing concerns in the UK, and I guess across Europe and across the world, about the fact that labor migration has sprung out of control, and the issue of migration has become central to politics in different countries alongside in Europe and abroad. And what we have seen is that these goals discussion.
We're having some issues.
About particularly about the I hope you immigration to the UK has been at a record level in 2022 with a range of different work visa programs. And even though many analyses have challenged the idea of left behind workers, media is still very much occupied by these, by these issues. Therefore, it's quite important to, bring some scientific rigor to this analysis. And this is what our chapter, and I guess other chapters in the book, have strived to do. So to this extent, we have looked at the distinction between short and long-term migrants that a lot of books and a lot of analysis actually do not do. And in the UK, the immigration statistics very much focuses on the term temporary migration. So these are typically migrants that have been in the UK for less than 12 months. So, what we're seeing, and to kind of sum up, basically, because I think my 3 minutes accounting, in the chapter, we've really tried to provide an overview of the different short-term migration programs that have existed in the UK. So there's a variety of different seasonal agricultural worker schemes, but there are also schemes that specifically target social care workers or, for example, highly skilled workers. So we also looked at a variety of different data sources that allow us to draw this distinction in order to bring this scientific rigor. And then we also have pointed out to different directions of research. And, to sum up basically what we, try to do with the chapter, we are showing and portraying that there are some uncomfortable parallels that are currently there between the seasonal worker scheme and guest worker programs in a variety of different countries, which doesn't sit very well with kind of a meritocratic narrative in which, migrants and their human capital should be acknowledged. So there is broad evidence of the skilling. It doesn't happen in all programs. So some, kind of programs are more likely, or we're more likely to see workers experiencing a variety of different skilling. And these are primarily seasonal worker schemes. And these are primarily also employer-driven schemes in which employers have more control essentially over who they get. And this means essentially that there is a scope for policy intervention, and there is a scope for further work that can disentangle these problems and make sure that we have a migrant workforce that indeed it fulfills the needs of the host country labor market, but allows for individuals to also realize their potential.
Okay, thank you very much, Nelly.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
And we had a bit of a technical thing.
Thank you.
Sorry, we had a bit of a technical mishap in the very beginning, but I think the message came through clearly.
Great.
Thank you for your intervention and for highlighting this chapter. And I really invite everyone later on to also read through the chapters. They really are very interesting. At least I think so. Now, the next speaker is Frederik de Wispelaere, who's a research expert at HIVA in the KU Leuven, who works on transnational social protection, intra-EU labor mobility, and who will give, I think, an overview as well in more detail on this issue. So, Frederik, the floor is yours. I'll give you a sign for 6 minutes. 6? Well, you have 8. I'll give you a sign for 6.
Okay. Thank you, Wouter. First of all, congratulations with the publication of the book, so to Mehtap. Thanks for giving me the opportunity in 6 minutes presenting my chapter. 8, okay. But in the end it will be 10 perhaps. On measuring short-term intra-EU labor mobility. Well, actually it could be also the name of the book, because, well, just mentioning also measuring could be also noted how important and how difficult it is to measure short-term labor mobility, because also there it remains under the radar. So what I have tried to do in this presentation, and also of course in the book chapter, is first of all come up with a definition of the notion. And that's perhaps the most easiest part, because then we enter in the discussion, okay, what are the different types of short-term labor mobility that we should take into account? That's one. And then secondly, how to quantify all these different groups of short-term labor mobility, because as we have seen also in a lot of other publications, well, there are several types of labor mobility, and to capture that in one data source, well, that's rather difficult, even impossible, I would say, at the European level, and then come up with some conclusions. So about the definition, below in red you see the definition I've used in the chapter. It benefits also from the definition used by the United Nations and the economic department of it, because that's a rather comprehensive definition. But not mentioning any time period. And I think it was important to define a maximum threshold. Most of the time they refer and made a distinction between less than 12 or more than 12 months. I think it does not make sense to define a minimum threshold of 3 months, because also there you see, again, that minimum threshold of 3 months. I think here it does not make sense to limit it or start with 3 months threshold. So broad definition we tried to use in this chapter. But then defining the different types, again, below you see the different types, large and broad types of labor mobility. But for various reasons, I think it was not a straightforward exercise to define these different types, because of, first of all, several types of intra-EU mobility that can be short and long-term, and also knowing and seeing that short-term can become long-term, referring, for instance, to the circular movers. There might also be an overlap between these types of short-term labor mobility, and that then is the risk of double counting. Not all these types of labor mobility have a legal definition, or there will be a difference between the legal definition and the statistical definition. And also what we, for instance, see in under posting, there are different legal definitions for the same notion. What we also try to do in the chapters is just mention also the importance. I know and that, of course, there are some cons of short-term intra-EU labor mobility, but definitely I think it's also important to mention all the time the benefits, the pros of short-term labor mobility, and that's certainly also what we try to highlight in this chapter, and also compare it to some extent to long-term intra-EU labor mobility. So also for that reason, I think it makes sense that we do not limit ourselves to the discussion on short-term labor mobility and different types of it, and also there we see difference in the benefits or the cons of the different types, but also compare it to long-term labor mobility. But for other reasons also, and this is not a comprehensive overview, it's important, I think, to collect these data because I think we underestimate the importance of intra-EU labor mobility. Also, when you look at migration economists, most of the time they limit themselves to referring to the permanent labor mobility, never referring to the short-term dimension of labor mobility, and that's one of the main reasons I would say to collect these data, but also, for instance, and I mentioned already, to have a look at the pros and cons of short-term labor mobility. Then looking at the quantifying dimension, so which data sources we can use. I limit myself in the chapter to the European data sources, so referring to, for instance, the EU labor force survey when collecting data and reporting data on EU movers and cross-border workers. For instance, posted workers, we can look at the data from the portable document A1, the prior declaration tool, but since 2 years also for road transport to the EU portal for road transporting declaration. And last but not least, well, for instance, business travelers for the tourism statistics. I do not mention seasonal workers because there it can be sometimes very difficult because we do not really have an administrative data. Again, there we have to look at, I think, the EU labor force survey. A lot of limitations of these data sources that were highlighted in the chapter. For instance, for the EU labor force survey, looking at the samples population, most of the time they only interview those who are reside or have the intention to reside for at least 1 year. Also, well, looking at is always representative the data we can collect by the European labor force survey. I think that's certainly not the case. So that's one. For instance, then for the data on posting, we see that there certainly is a discrepancy between the number of posted workers where we have a notification versus the real number of ongoing, incoming and outgoing posted workers. So a lot of limitations, I would say. But still, what we managed to do is to come up with some statistics. Again, always knowing the limitations of these data. And here you see an overview of these data, referring to the A1 data and the prior declaration tool for posting. But what you see in the middle is that, for instance, the business trips, and that's sometimes also overlooked, and also show the importance of short-term labor mobility in the European Union. Well, the high number of business trips in the European Union, around more than 20 million cross-border trips in 2023. So to conclude and to come up with some recommendation, I think it's clear that the current data sources we can look at the European level are very fragmented. I have a lot of limitation, but still I think we can come up with some estimates, sometimes a guesstimate on the importance of short-term labor mobility. Looking at the future, I think it's clear that we will not discover any new administrative or resisted data. In contrary, I think there is somewhat pressure, I think, to look at these administrative data and the limitations of these data. So it might be an option to include one or more questions, for instance, in the main questionnaire, or a specific ad hoc module in the European labor force survey to try to collect more and better data on short-term labor mobility. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Frederik, for giving this short overview of what is possible and where we really lack some sort of information and data. Now I will give the floor to the second of our country chapters, to Professor Maria Dolores Carrascosa Bermejo, who is professor at the University of Pontificia Comillas, which I'm hoping I'm being correct in. And Lola, you have 3 minutes to give the main message of your chapter, and I will intervene after a while. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me, and congratulations for the book and for Wouter and Mehtap, because I know that the coordination and editing has been hard work. And well, my name is Dolores Carrascosa, and I am a professor at Comillas University in Madrid. And I'm going to give you some ideas regarding my chapter. Well, no, the chapter has been written also with Oscar Contreras, my colleague from Spain too, that is now in paternity leave. So I'm speaking for him as well. The chapter deals with challenges and dynamics of short-term intra-EU labor mobility, only professional mobility, focusing on Spain. And we have decided, because it has been already said, that we don't have a definition of short-term mobility. We decided that the limit was 12 months. And I want to underline as well that we identify different types of mobility, because as Frederik has said before, there are very different categories, including migrants. For instance, we can talk about frontier workers, job seekers that we want to include as another type of free movement of workers, posted workers, and seasonal workers that can be in many categories. They can be posted, they can be migrants, they can be... So it's difficult to separate them, because all of them are linked. But the truth is that they have very different rights and obligations, and they are governed by a mixture of EU law and national legislation that have to be taken into account. So I think showing the different framework in a short, very short explanation of the legal framework, it has been difficult. We are the lawyers in this part, and we enjoy this part, because it was a kind of a challenge to explain everything in a short space. And among these categories, the problem has been that we don't have a lot of data. This is the main problem. We want to underline the lack of comprehensive data, and we have done our best, but it was very difficult. We have more data about posting, thanks to a project that Frederik has in Leuven, and the posting stat, and we have this data. But even in this case, we have problems to know exactly how many posted workers are coming to Spain, because we lack of a central electronic register that we are expecting for a long time, and I hope it's going to be working very soon. A part of the lack of comprehensive data, the complexity of the legal framework, well, it's very difficult to know, for example, the free movement within the Schengen area makes it difficult to track the short-term mobility of EU nationals. There are a lot of EU nationals living in Spain as well. So the statistics provided in the chapter, I think they are indicative, but unfortunately they don't give us a full picture of the short-term labor mobility to and from Spain. In conclusion, I think the EU labor, intra-EU labor mobility in Spain, I think is something crucial. We have to know, and I think it's crucial for the EU internal market. So there are significant challenges that need to be addressed and to ensure fair and efficient mobility. So I hope we can go on working on that. And well, anything else? Thank you for your attention, and I welcome for your questions and comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That also reminds me to give an honorable mention to Marco Rocca and Penelope Hardy, who are also part of the legal researchers in this book. They wrote a very interesting chapter as well, but because we didn't have space for everyone, they couldn't present today, but do check that out as well. And then there's another chapter across the EU by Ivana Fellini, looking at labor market outcomes, who was also not presenting today, but just to mention the width of the book in more detail. Okay, now we go to the chapter on digital nomads by Anna Krasteva, who's a professor at the Department of Political Sciences at the New Bulgarian University and founder and director of CERMES, working on migration and refugees policies and politics, and is running away, or? No, you'll present from there. Okay. So Anna, the floor is yours, and after 6 minutes, I'll give some sort of signal.
It is really, it's okay. It is really inspiring and fascinating to study a phenomenon which is bright new, so from the real beginning, so emerging phenomenon, they are future oriented, so it is a way to look at the future which starts today. So it was my case with the digital nomads. So professors, we want to connect with the public so that I can't speak sitting, so that's why I come close to you. A new phenomenon could not be very well known, so that there are, of course, very few data, no need to repeat that, but there is also a lot of imagination, a lot of inspiration. The most important to start with is that this is a triple innovation. Innovation of work, remote work, in technologies, digital technologies, and also in mobility, in type of mobility, what in migration studies we call a transition from arrows to spaghettis, more and more differentiated and individualized mobilities. So a little bit the logic, first mapping the field, you'll see conceptual history, ontological history in 30 seconds. Who, how, and why are the main questions asked in the study. For instance, to say why. There are reasons for becoming digital nomads. They are slightly different from the ones to becoming short-term migrant. But also there are reasons for quitting. It is by definition temporary phenomenon, so that it's really interesting to study both the beginning and the end. Conceptual history. 2006, the first outstanding, let's say, publication, so only 20 years. So very short, but really interesting history. Another aspect is that most publications till now, they are in a World Leisure Journal. We are at a forum on work, on labor, but it is still, let's say, between the two fields, and how to combine the two temporalities is a crucial question. So how to become, so ontological history, how it happened. So very, again, recent phenomenon. We do know when was the real boom. And we do know that it is not becoming a mainstream, but it is becoming increasingly important and a significant phenomenon. The most famous, quoted, accepted definition is the one of Dave Cook. I will let you read it. There are a few open questions, among which, so how often, so that they are mobile, how often they change place during a year. Again, a lot of elements of definition, and the field work much richer than the definitions. And also how far you have to go, let's say, for becoming a digital nomad. A very interesting dialogue between the field work and the definitions. Digital nomads in EU, three big categories. So my fieldwork covered the two of them. And you'll see a little bit more details. So the fieldwork, it is an initial, let's say, study, the first part of a bigger study. So 15 interviews. You see some countries are overrepresented. It is not that they are overrepresented in the phenomenon, but in the fieldwork also because of the snowball effect. And probably just pay attention of the sector of activity, because in a few seconds you see what the literature says. And here you could compare with the fieldwork itself, so that it is more diverse, the fieldwork. For instance, you will see, of course, IT and marketing are the major occupations, but I had also humanitarian work. I had also persons who changed their activity during their life, professional life, as digital nomads. Somebody who started with marketing for coming to online psychotherapy, because the more mobile the people are, the more they need online psychotherapy. And the digital nomad herself, let's say, she trained and she started practicing this. So very interesting occupations. So two theoretical triangles, so for how to theorize digital nomads. So the first one, the major one, is that it is the result of three poles, three conceptual poles. One is a very strong agency, but the other poles are also very strong and important. So policies from one side and marketing from another side. The other triangle is, let's say, how identities are shaped, and they are also shaped and expressed in a lot of narratives. It is a constructed phenomenon, so that narratives are very important. So the types, again, the most influential typology is the one of Dave Cook. I tested it on my fieldwork. So for the, okay, so the three first categories are probably the ones you associate more easily: freelance, business owner, and self-right. But there are two interesting categories, which are experimental ones and armchair. So quite likely this is the first time you hear. Experimental ones are those who start, but really to test. Normally they do not earn money at the beginning, and they simply try to understand for themselves should they engage in digital nomadism or not. And armchairs are at an even more initial stage. They stay home in their armchairs and, let's say, start to take part in digital nomads, online groups, etc., etc. So to reflect again, if they will join this type of life or not, and you see that those armchairs, there are millions, so that it is really worth considering this phenomenon in generational terms, so that most do correspond to the image we have. Young, but not all of them. Also baby boomers are represented, etc. So if I have time, okay, I would tell you extremely interesting stories, but it will be at another, let's say, forum. So taxis are a crucial phenomenon. but again, diversity of cases, so that some are nomad, mobile, very mobile, but do practice fiscal patriotism. So they keep paying taxes home. Others exactly the opposite, so fiscal nomadism and some fiscal mobility. Temporalities, it's absolutely fascinating new topic for migration studies, absolutely crucial here. Policy, among the policies also digital nomad visas, not let's say for the European citizens, but for others, which is a very important. Marketing, so that this is a professional way of life which enjoys huge marketing, which makes the phenomenon really constructed. Three different types of narratives, glorifying, disapproving, and analytical. So an example of disapproving, okay. Concluding remarks, dear Chair. Okay, so for keeping the time, they are a result, but also catalyst of transformative change, of a trend for the future of work. Single market and a regulatory gray area in EU, they mostly facilitate because they increase the flexibility of digital nomads. Strong innovative agency, this is really, let's say, the major let's say, take away from this study. And there is one element which is conspicuously lacking. It is the enforcement of rights, and I needed to say at this institute. So the really last message, extremely innovative, interesting, future-oriented phenomenon, and lacking research. Lacking not, but lagging behind research. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for an attempt to have a very brief overview of this really interesting research you're starting on, and well, I'm sure we'll see many more results come out. So thank you so much. Now we have two more online interventions. First by Nahikari Irastorza, who was at the University of Malmö when this book started and is talking about the Swedish case, but is now at an associate professor at the University of Deusto at the Basque Country. My apologies if I mispronounced that. Nahikari, the floor is yours for, again, about 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Well, first of all, thank you, Wouter and Mehtap, for the opportunity to talk about my chapter, and most of all, congratulations on your fantastic editing work of this book, and I'm very glad that it's already out. So my chapter is heavily focused on the implications of the posting of workers in Sweden, where again I was based until last summer. And this channel is the main way of short-term employment of EU workers in Sweden, and also a regular source of labor already in sectors like construction, not only in Sweden, but also in many other countries. But as my colleagues explained before, so this kind of legal frameworks not only provides employment opportunities, but they also entail risks. For example, the potential dualization of domestic workers, and I would like to talk about this a little bit today. Despite these important considerations, the employment experiences of temporary intra-EU workers have been understudied, and this is also the case in Sweden. And again, Sweden is no exception to the main reasons for this, and I would like to again highlight these reasons. First of all, citizens of EU countries are not required to register with the migration agency. And second, employment contracts of less than 1 year are not included in official statistics. And therefore, it's not possible to obtain microdata on short-term EU workers. So because of this, there are few studies on the employment experiences of EU citizens working in Sweden for less than a year. And the studies that I have reviewed address one of the following two broad questions. What are the implications of this directive for sectors that rely heavily on posted workers? Or what are the experiences of posted workers in the Swedish construction sector? But before I reveal the conclusions of these studies, I would like to just share some key characteristics of posted workers in Sweden. First of all, the number of posted workers, or the estimated number, has increased by half in the last few years. Between 2019 and 22, the main sending countries were Poland, Lithuania, and Germany. And the majority of the notifications received in that period were connected to the construction sector. The average duration of postings has shortened. In 2022, almost 40% were planned for a maximum of 9 days and 80% for less than 2 months. However, considering that the same employee is often notified several times for the same job assignment, we might think that the actual average duration of the assignment is longer than that. But still, it's very much short-term employment, as we can see in these figures. And now, coming back to the literature on posted workers in Sweden, as I said, it can be classified around two main themes. The first one is concerns the working conditions of posted workers. So studies on the experiences of posted workers in Sweden, especially in the construction sector, show that they have precarious employment and also often housing conditions. While the employment conditions might seem to be lawful on paper, they often report working long hours without any further compensation. And the second theme is related to the implications of this practice for labor markets and industrial relations in host countries and Sweden. So there is a concern that practices like the posting of foreign workers, which are used to increase competition and lower labor costs, will depress wages, and that they will be detrimental to the overall labor standards in these countries. The posting of workers via subcontractors registered abroad, for example, affects the ability of unions and other institutions to regulate and monitor the employment situation and conditions of posted workers. And finally, what I haven't found in the literature I reviewed are studies on the implications of posting of workers, not only on the macro and micro economies of sending countries, but also on its impact on the lives of transnational families, where one parent works regularly abroad. And I think these are also important questions that scholars should continue investigating in the future. And this is what I would like, what I wanted to share about my chapter.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nahikari. And now for the last intervention online, we have Ehsan Valezadeh, who is a professor at the University of Bamberg and works at the IAB in Germany. And Ehsan, the floor is yours. Try to keep to 3 minutes, please. And I look forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much, Wouter. Thank you for having me here. I also would like, first of all, to congratulate you on this book, very interesting book on temporary migration, or within EU, intra-EU migration. And also a big thank to you, both of you, Mehtap and Wouter, for being patient and all the coordination with us co-authors. Yeah, so I will present you, this is chapter 6 of this book, joint work with my colleague David Aduns, where we look at the potential and temporariness of EU migration, and we basically give in a sort of a case study of Germany, how, at least from the German experience, how this EU migration has developed and evolved, and what are the main characteristics. The objective of this chapter is twofold. First, we use a national representative survey, the Gallup World Poll, and using this data set, we analyze the composition and the characteristics of potential migrants from EU countries to Germany. So what are basically the selection of migrants that are basically want to come to Germany? What kind of composition and characteristics do they have? The second part, we go into the micro-analysis, and here we use a representative longitudinal household survey, the IEB ZUP migration survey of recent cohorts of migrants to Germany. And here we try to we investigate the determinants of migration decision, basically, of those individuals who have already migrated to Germany. So the first part, if you want, is from the macro perspective, who wants to come to Germany, what are basically the main characteristics, and second part is basically those who already live in Germany, what are the characteristics in terms of making migration decision. So from the first part, the selection of potential migrants to Germany, we get basically three interesting results on the factors behind the migration selection. The first one is we find a negative and significant relationship between the migration intention of potential migrants from both EU and non-EU countries to Germany with regard to labor market conditions and perceptions of future economic conditions and living standards in their home country. So basically, the better the situation in the home countries, the less attraction or incentives for individuals to migrate abroad. The second finding is that migration propensity to Germany, at least, is significantly lower among potential female migrants. It is also interesting results compared to other countries, for instance, and compared to Scandinavian countries, we see that the migration propensity is for female migrants is higher. And the third result of this first part is that we see also sort of regional heterogeneity regarding migration selection. So potential migrants from EU countries to Germany are negatively selected in terms of educational attainment, while potential migrants from non-EU countries are positively selected compared to population in their home countries. And this latter finding, so this positive selection of non-EU migrants confirms essentially the role of migration policy in influencing also the migration selection, especially from third country nationals. The results from the microanalysis of temporariness of migration, here we basically see that demographic and social characteristics of temporariness of migrants give us another set of insights. So we find a negative and significant relationship between family structure and temporary migration decisions among EU migrants in Germany, especially EU nationals with children aged 16 or younger are more likely to stay permanently in Germany compared to those without children, which is understandable because of investment in children that they have already taken.
Okay, Ehsan, I'm going to ask you to conclude, please.
Yeah, sure. So the conclusion essentially is that we find overall highlights that the temporary migration decision may influence also the selection effect of migration, and hence also they might have implications for assessment of integration process and also the impact of migration on labor market in the host countries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. So that's a really nice chapter that also takes a slightly broader view on the decisions to move to Germany for different types of movers. So thank you to all the speakers and all the authors who collaborate on the book. As you've heard, it's often a case of we can't really capture it all very well, trying our best, and there is, we think, a way forward. But now I open the floor for questions and for comments. We still have a small half hour. So please, if you have any comments or questions, also online, now is the moment. And if you could just specify briefly who you are, so briefly introduce yourself and ask your question. Yes.
Thank you. Did you study the unionization of those mobile workers, and particularly if there are some hinderings for them to unionize? Thank you.
That's a really good question, and I think actually the answer in this book is no, but in the policy panel that will come next, there will be some discussion of this which might be very relevant. But I mean, if the panel has something to say on this, I will let them speak, of course, in a moment. Yes.
Good afternoon, Anna Kwiatkiewicz from Business Europe. Thank you very much for your presentation. The point on data, you mentioned that there is a challenge with data. So I would be very grateful if you could, for your respective parts, comment on that. What data is available, what is not possible, how you go about it, what can you do to have a reliable, material for analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's collect a few more questions and I'll give the floor again. Unless there are no more, there's a question in the back.
Thank you very much. My name is Camille, I work for the European Commission, and I had a question more linked to the student side. So maybe if you take into account traineeships and internships into those kind of mobilities, although they're very linked with education, sometimes they do happen outside of a program. Thank you.
Any more questions, or shall we respond for a moment? Then I'll ask the speakers in person, and if the speakers online want to say something, just raise your hand or send me a message, and I'll give you the floor as well. But
I don't think I will say more than what you replied on the unionization question. This was already in our mind indeed, because we thought this was relevant also for unions to be able to capture such workers, but as they escape data, they also escape, some of those more settled unionization processes. Because, for example, in the case of seasonal workers, they come for a few months. There is not enough time to find a union, and then by the time you get involved, your season is over. You go back, so it's challenging. But I think there needs to be some improvement there, indeed, because they really need to be supported. But we don't have data on that, indeed. And I think I will leave Frederick with the data issues.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think, well, in the chapter, you will find a lot of information of the data limitations. So I invite you to have a look, or look at the chapter itself. Because of the fact that you are from Business Europe, I think it makes sense also to make the link to, okay, the issue of collecting administrative data and the issue of for instance, red tape. And I think certainly also in the ongoing discussions on, for instance, the A1, right, declaration tools, for instance, I think this is an issue that always come up, because in the end, yeah, I'm interested in statistics, trying to have a comprehensive overview of the number of posted workers, for instance, but because I know also, of course, that there is some limitations, and the question is also all the time, okay, do we need these data to be reported by employers? Is it useful to have them? And most of the time, it's relevant to have these data, for instance, for the prior declaration, also in terms of enforcement, first of all. But these data are not collected for statistical purposes. And that's always what we mentioned also in the reporting on posting. Okay, we know that there is a reasoning behind of reporting, but most of the time not for statistical purposes. And so it's clear that for administrative data, there are a lot of limitations, and therefore also the recommendation to look not only at administrative data, but certainly also in the future, hopefully also rely on for instance, survey data from the European Labour Force survey data. So I hope that's an answer to your question.
In the student issue, do you have anything?
Yes, I don't think I have something to say on that, because we are not able to distinguish, I think, that.
No, I think that might be a group that it falls between the cracks a bit, which is something very interesting to discuss. Anna, yes, and then Nahikari as well.
To your question, Business Europe representative, I think most of the comments and probably your question refers, let's say, to data as big sets of data, statistical data, etc., etc. But in academia, we do know and we value different type of data, which are qualitative data. For instance, for really new emerging phenomenon, which are not huge in statistical terms, like the digital nomads. They are qualitative data, they are interviews, small surveys, etc. For instance, one of the categories I mentioned of the typology of digital nomads are digital nomads who are entrepreneurs. So we are at the real beginning of the study of digital nomads, so there are not enough, let's say, studies on all categories, but myself, my colleagues, and we have the small community of researchers on digital nomads. We would be very happy, let's say, together to unite forces and to have more focused studies on digital nomads, entrepreneurs, etc. And the qualitative data would be of huge utility because they look deeper at the phenomenon and they really, let's say, in white, they help us understand the phenomenon at their beginning, etc., before they become statistically, let's say, how to say, valuable phenomenon. So we do our work as researchers and we apply the methods we have, and they are equally valid in academia. So qualitative and quantitative methods and methodologies are equally valid. So let's stay united and let's say go deeper, let's say, in some phenomena.
Also, Nahikari wanted to say something, but Anna, you have an addition to make, or? Yeah.
So better with the mic.
So just to clarify that I do understand where you come from, because I have the research background, 10 years at the Warsaw School of Economics and a postdoc at KU Leuven. And my specialty at that time was qualitative data. But I still insist that there is a difference between qualitative and quantitative. And the only thing that I wanted to make clear that we need to, you need to as researchers, explain what kind of data you use, because it will be different when that is qualitative, very useful, very interesting, especially at this stage of looking at the digital nomads, but it's not allowing for concluding, for example, drawing the conclusion that you could draw using big set of data, right? So it's rather data exemplar, certain trends. And I'm very careful about it because in the discussion of posting of workers, because we didn't really show what phenomena it is, what percentage of total population, not even a percent, 2 million people. I'm not saying that this is not important, but this is not, you know, a half of EU employment. And you, in the discussions, political discussions especially, can have the impression that this is like half of people being posted everywhere and abused. I'm exaggerating. So in this very interesting point on digital nomads, and thank you for it, because we also look at that. It's an interesting point for employers, especially in the situation of labor force shortages and attracting talents. It's very important to make sure that you know, it's qualitative more than quantitative. Thank you.
No, but no, I'm going to give the floor to Nahikari in a moment, and there can always be more discussion in the break. But that is part of what we're trying to do with the book, where possible, to try to put some quantitative information out there, which is easier in the posting thanks to the work Frederick and colleagues have done, and it's a bit more difficult in the other types of intra-EU mobility. But very happy to have more discussions, because I think we are agreed that that should be the basis of saying anything. And of course, the number as a whole is not massive, but as you also know, in some sectors it is quite an important phenomenon, and in some countries. So that, I think, is also why it's important to focus on it. Nahikari has asked a long time ago to speak as well. And we also have a question online, which I'll take in a moment, which is about the gender dimension. But Nahikari, first, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Coming back to the initial question, the numbers of unionization, I think in some cases, like for posted workers, my guess is that it's very, very low. I mean, we need to consider, as I said, for example, in Sweden, the average, like 40% of posted workers or postings have a duration of a maximum of 9 days, and 80% less than 2 months. And even if the same person is posted for the same assignment, still assignments are expected to be very, very short, which is a huge challenge for unionization, right? So again, this is just a guess, but I am guessing that it is very low.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Then, are there any more questions or people who have comments? Or yeah, yes, you may ask.
Hello, thank you. What is important for, I'm a journalist, so I'm going to ask a question because I like to know if you have an answer about the most difficult thing for a mobile worker, whatever he does, wherever he goes, especially if he has to cross borders within Europe and is a European citizen, is to get paid, and where to get paid and how to get paid. And for that you have to get a bank account. Where? Everywhere? Or is it a general bank account? Or to get a bank account, for example, here in Belgium, you have to be a resident. To get residence, you have to go to some municipality and say, look, I'm working here, but you're not working. You're just looking for a job, and you will stay if you find a job. And you are a European citizen. So about the bank problem, getting paid, how? Cash is not very usual because it's legal anyway, legal work, but they don't usually pay in cash, and it's not very interesting either. They're not going to pay on something cloudy or whatever. So how do they get paid? How do they get what we call bank mobility? The banking problem is a problem. It was not before a long time ago, but it is now. How strange, now that mobility is very usual and a total right for everybody, for the contractor, for the offering services or whatever, for the worker. It's everyday's business.
So your question is on banks and the practicality of getting paid?
Yes, getting paid.
I don't know if we can say very much on this, because very often, of course, it would be with a contract. I mean, we're mainly talking about formal types of work, not so much informal. But if anyone has an answer to that, I'd be very interested to hear it. And then there was a question online about a gender breakdown, if we can say anything. This is a bit tiring because we always have to talk about data difficulties, but maybe with the posting you have some more information on gender breakdown. And Naikari also raised her hand. So I will give again the floor to the panel for concluding remarks. If there's no more questions. There's one more question. Olga? And then we'll do concluding remarks and get a well-deserved break.
Thank you so much. I'm Olga Georgiev from Oslomet, and I'm currently a visiting researcher at ETUI. In terms of this representativeness of the data that we do have at the moment, I think Wouter made a really good point in the sense that, well, it's also in some sectors it's actually incredibly an important phenomenon, and for some specific sectors the numbers are quite large, and also for specific countries the numbers are quite large. And I was wondering if a way forward from this is not what potential there is in taking actually a sector-based perspective or an occupation-based perspective and look at that as a driver for demand for labor, for short-term labor mobility.
Thank you. So Naikari, we'll start with you, then Ehsan, and then we'll go to the panel online. Naikari, to the panel on person, sorry.
Yeah, just a short comments on the first question about opening a bank account. Again, focusing on posted workers, they would be paid in where their company is based and not in the posting country. So that wouldn't be a problem in this case. So they'll get paid where they are hired, and this is not where they work. It's a different country.
Thank you. Ehsan?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the last question regarding occupations and sectors. So what we do, at least we touch it very briefly in our chapter. So we look at the temporariness of migration with respect to type of skilled jobs and so on. And we find indeed that high-skilled migrants performing skilled type of jobs, they tend to stay temporarily, at least in Germany, compared to those who are doing low-skilled jobs and have a lower educational attainment. And I think this has to do very much with the transferability of human capital across countries. And this is much easier for very high-skilled, high-performing individuals, that they can easily transfer their human capital or their skills in other EU country, and maybe for some very country-specific type of occupations. But that's a very interesting question. So we touch it very briefly, not in depth, but this is something that we could try to look closer.
Thank you. Mehtap, do you still?
Yeah,
we'll just go down the line.
Yeah, I was just thinking for the bank and the payment issues. I don't think we had information on the EU LFS about how people are paid, so we couldn't do this in the chapter. And I'm just assuming that at least for the Eurozone, it should be relatively straightforward. But I of course don't know without measuring how this could be problematic. But I understand the point that we don't take into account in this work, in the chapter. On the occupational sectoral approach, I think it's very useful. So I'm actually collecting some thoughts for future work potentially. But what we have done partly in one of the indicators that we've looked at in our chapter, it's the occupational status. So we've seen some patterns there where some intra-EU workers are actually performing relatively bad compared to the majority population. So it's a first approach, but I think more needs to be done probably at the sectoral, bit of sectoral focus. Thank you for pointing that.
Thank you. I said I would go down the line, but I lied most grievously. I'm going to let Lola speak for a moment because she raised her hand. Yeah. And then we'll go to Frederic.
Thank you. No, it's just regarding the sectors, I think we have to admit that there are some jobs that the nationals of some member states are not willing to perform. So they are looking for workers abroad from third country nationals. We are talking about also EU nationals are moving around Europe for performing work in agriculture or tourism sectors that they are not very well paid, that perhaps the nationals are not willing to fulfill. So we have to think that this mobility is looking for cheaper workforce all the time. I think so. Thank you.
Yes, so I know from other research as well that there seems to be some clustering in specific occupations and sectors of EU nationals and especially third country migrants, and that is linked to that, of course. Then Frederic, you?
Yeah, on the sectoral dimension, I'm certainly in favor of having that approach to looking at specific sectoral activities, and also, yes, certainly when looking, for instance, at the costs and benefits of short-term labor mobility, I think there you will see also differences of these posted workers, for instance, or other short-term movers, that there are difference between sector of activities that all the time should be taken into account also in the political discussion. So certainly that sectoral approach, I think, adds value to also the political discussion. And certainly on the gender dimension, this is a variable we would like to collect also in our data collection on A1 data, for instance, or prior declaration too. But we do not have that for the moment, but we know also from country reporting by our experts, for instance, of postings that there you see differences by sector of activity. Again, we know, and most of the time when we discuss posting, we limit ourselves to transport and construction. So most of the time, male workers, but we should not forget, of course, that also a lot of female posted workers are sent to, for instance, Germany or Austria and are active in the living care. Certainly also there, I think the dimension of, okay, there is certainly also posted workers, female posted workers active in, for instance, the care sector should be taken into account.
I think that is the key issue, that the gender dimension seems to follow the general division in sectors as the, so it depends on what sectors are heavily attracting. And if it's construction and tourism, we have, and transport, we have more men, but there's also a lot of care and some factory work where the divisions are different. Anna.
So gender and statistics in digital nomads. So concerning digital nomads, gender specificity does not refer to sectors, but does refer to agency. So it's a different phenomenon. I had the chance to have enough, let's say, women in my field work. According to the few statistics, men still, let's say, dominate in the digital nomads. But it is really so that women, in terms of agency, show the same very strong, innovative, auto-centered agency. A last comment concerning our debate on statistics on digital nomads. The best statistics on digital nomads are in US. And it is connected with the fact that, let's say, the phenomenon is more developed there, and also the research is more developed there. So that I could anticipate that in EU it will come slowly, so that the research will follow the development of phenomenon. But in US they do have statistics, and they update them every year, and they are available. Let's say for understanding the global phenomenon, which is the framework also for understanding the European phenomenon, we do use those statistics really quite substantially.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Just one sentence on the gender, I forgot to reply. We controlled for gender in our analysis, but we didn't run the analysis by gender. So I reported the average results, so we might expect to see some gender differences if we had to run it for men or for women only, intra-EU movers by gender. But that's maybe something that we could quickly check in the future, and we might see some gaps indeed in terms of gender, but we didn't do it for this chapter specifically.
No, I mean, I think, as always, it's a very important point. It's just the question of how you cut the data and what. Okay, so with that being said, I just want to thank you, the participants, for being present here, and everyone on the panel in person and online for their participation and for participating in the book and now in the panel. Thank you so much.
And the moderator.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second part of this book launch. My name is Sotiria Theodoropoulou. I'm the head of unit European Economic Employment and Social Policies, and a colleague of the editors of this book. So welcome to this second policy panel, during which we will be taking stock of future prospects of intra-EU mobility, ongoing risks and vulnerabilities for intra-EU mobile workers, and the cross-border enforcement of intra-EU mobility through the respective legislation. To discuss these questions, I have a panel of select speakers with me today. Starting from directly on my right, there's Jonathan Corner, who is a policy officer at the European Federation of Building and Woodworkers, which represents construction workers and woodworkers, as its name says, and whose work focuses on posting and subcontracting. To his right, we have Sigrid Kaspar, who is a policy officer at DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion at the European Commission, in the unit that is responsible for labor mobility, public employment services, and the European Labour Authority. To her right, there is Joachim Smedman, legal advisor at the ETUI. And last but not least, to the further right, we have Zane Raznaka, Senior Labour Mobility Officer at the European Labour Authority, and a dear former colleague of ours from the ETUI. So the format of this panel today will be, I will ask each speaker up to 2 questions, and they will take turns in replying, and then we will hopefully have 15 to 20 minutes for you to take your questions and have some discussion. So I would start with Sigrid. Sigrid, the book has made an effort to chart flows and outcomes of intra-EU movers, which we know is also a key topic for the European Commission. Would you please tell us a bit more what in your work you see as trends in intra-EU mobility over time?
Thanks a lot. Thanks also for inviting me to this. It worked. Yeah, perfect. For inviting me to that panel. And I have already had the pleasure of exchanging with many colleagues here. And it's really interesting to meet people who are also into intra-EU labor mobility. And the book is really a good sign at the right time. I think it will be challenging to keep up the level of mobility which we see right now. We have about 10 million EU mobile workers de facto, plus the number of short-term where we had the previous discussion that they are extremely difficult to capture. So after all, I would say probably around 14 million people who are crossing the border regularly, irregularly, having crossed it. What we also see for the normal labor mobility, which is captured in population statistics or by the LFS, we have around 85% of these people are young, fairly young, meaning below 50 years of age. So if you look at that, and if you also consider that you have demographic aging, this level will be difficult to maintain, also because labor mobility is very much a circular phenomenon. We see an outward mobility of about 1 million every year, and 750,000 basically coming back approximately. So 3 out of 4 people come back to their country of origin. So good so far. We also see and we observe increasing, not sure whether it's increasing, but I observe when going through the labor mobility report and also the Eurobarometer, which we had 2-3 years ago, that labor mobility is a natural something for academics. If you are a student, then of course it's part of your career, it's part of your CV to have been abroad. But the share of persons with a secondary education, that is squeezing successively. And of course this can have to do with the recognition of qualifications, but it's a thing where I think maybe these people really have more difficulties to be mobile, and maybe we leave them out a bit, and maybe we should attract more attention also in times of a society which has a tendency to, in a way, break apart. And I would think that this is a trend where which would benefit from us looking a bit closer at it. Then we have the issue of return mobility. We also see every now and again in reports that returning home is not a straightforward thing for many people. For some, yes. If you do not stay for very long and you return after 3, 4, 5 years, it works well. But if you return after 20 years, after 50, something like that, it appears to be more difficult and more challenging. Also, per tendency, creating a bit of hesitation, frustration with those who are actually returning. So maybe another thing to look at and to see what can we do to build these bridges in a smoother and easier way. And a third trend, which I would look, and I'm aware that this is not necessarily and immediately linked to short-term mobility, but it's more the general picture, which of course is what is easier to approach. It's that we have a tendency, like always, to take achievements for granted, but to complain about gaps. And a gap which we, or let's put it like that, a challenge which we might see, and where we had looked at last year in the intra-EU mobility report, was social security coordination. In particular, we saw that pensions, we see every year we right now see 5.4 million pensions being transferred. We have seen an increase in 2022 when we actually analyzed it. And we were discussing extensively with the experts how far this tendency would develop. And we said, yeah, I was guessing 10 million in 10 years' time or in 5-6 years' time. Consultant didn't refuse that, but they didn't agree either. So we were somewhere in between. But you can expect that the growth rates in terms of social security coordination increase massively. And this is also true when it comes to what we have seen before, nomad workers, digital nomads, and so on, where the question of how do we actually coordinate social security is a major thing, and where I would say that what the Commission can do without the member states actually buying in and really doing the effort is fairly limited. Overall, I would say, and this is of course very much a personal view, we focus sometimes a bit much on the problems. I know they are there, but still another question would be, what is actually the form of mobility within Europe which we actually want? And if you come from a bigger member state, you might discover that actually there are also within a member state significant differences. So if you are in Poland and you live in Warsaw, you might have a different household income, living standard than if you live in Mazurski. If you are in France in a certain region, in Lille, you might have a different living standard than living in Paris, and a different. So do we see it in that context, or do we think labor mobility should have a completely different sort of, what is the aspiration in short term? On that note, I conclude my first contribution.
Thank you very much. I will pick up on this tendency that you mentioned about complaining about the problems to move on to Joachim and ask him about the risks of exploitation and bad working conditions of even intra-EU mobile workers that the book has, it's one of its findings, despite the fact that mobility is an important freedom in the EU. So, what could you tell us about the work that unions are doing on organizing mobile and cross-border workers as a way of dealing with these risks and bad working conditions?
Thank you. It works? Yeah. Thank you very much. Many questions in one, but I'll try to single out some elements and to first of all answer a serious question: what kind of mobility do we want? From the ETUI side, what we really want to see is that also labor mobility contributes to good quality jobs. This is very much at the forefront of the EU agenda now, coming up soon, a quality jobs roadmap by the European Commission, but we really want to see that also labor mobility contributes to this. It is a fundamental freedom and right of citizens to exercise and enjoy their freedom of movement, but it needs to be, so to say, free in three different senses. So the freedom to use it, but also free from abuse and freely chosen, meaning that it's not something that we exercise simply because there's a lack of opportunities or prospects where we live or where we are born, but because we want to, and not to be used as a quick fix to remedy labor or skills shortages by simply, let's say, outsourcing poor quality jobs to mobile and migrant workers. So I think that is an important point to bear in mind when we talk about free and fair labor mobility. So another issue often raised now in the EU context is the issue of simplification. And here I would just want to say that, of course, we want to promote this freedom, but simplification is not the only answer to labor mobility and quality jobs. We also need rules that protect and enforcement that works. And to answer a little bit the second element of the question, what do unions do in protecting, organizing mobile and migrant workers? And first of all, I'd like to emphasize the role of collective agreements, setting on the one hand a level playing field in the sector, making sure that we do not compete based on poor working conditions and labor costs, but that we also ensure equal treatment for workers, whether they're local or foreign. And of course, collective agreements apply across the board to mobile workers based on the principle of equal treatment, but also there are certain elements that are specific or specifically beneficial to mobile workers, also beyond, let's say, travel, board and lodging, that are the most typical ones when you go on a mission abroad, for example. But also, for example, we do see that unions negotiate conditions for accommodation for seasonal workers, or OSH and trainings in the work site. In the construction sector, we have the example of social ID cards. And it's also possible, we see examples in some member states negotiating collectively social aspects of subcontracting, for example. Unions are the eyes and ears on the ground, we can say. So depending a little bit on the national labor market model and prerogatives of unions, there can be a certain element also in terms of enforcement mandate of unions. But beyond that, what is important to also be aware of is the role that unions playing in supporting and in informing mobile workers. And speaking about organizing these workers, let's say, first of all, it's particularly difficult to organize short-term mobile workers exactly because they do not stay for very long time. It's a vulnerable group of workers, sometimes also quite dependent on their employer, meaning that they might be afraid to join a union, or they come from a different country, so they don't speak the language, and so on. So it's particularly important to inform them about their rights and also support them in claiming these rights. And in this sense, unions make a very important contributions on the ground, because static online information is simply not enough. We do need to help them to be aware, and claim these rights. Access to justice is really an issue also when it comes to mobile workers. So, for example, the Fair Mobility Network, trade unions on the ground, informing workers really make a crucial contribution in this sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joachim. Zane, the book has been dealing with different forms of mobility for work, with, of course, posting, which a lot of your past work at the Institute has been dealing, being an important one, but also somewhat a contentious one. Would you please tell us a little bit about the work that ELA does to facilitate intra-EU mobility and stopping abuses?
Sure. First of all, I'm very happy to be here. Many thanks for the invitation. And I also wanted to say that it's great to see that labor mobility research is faring very well at the ETUI. So I'm happy that that's the case. And first, I wanted to give a short disclaimer. This is a policy panel. At the same time, at ELA, we do not participate in policy making. We leave it to the Commission. What we do, we have much more humble purpose. We try to aid our stakeholders in their efforts to enforce labor mobility and social security coordination rules. And this also maybe goes towards answering a little bit the question. We do quite many things, but I will note some few ones, and then I will also maybe shortly explain specifically what we do to stop abuses, because that's probably the closest to my heart, and also what I do in the enforcement, and we at the enforcement unit do. So when it comes to generally how we facilitate intra-EU mobility, we have EURES, we have EU talent pool job matching projects. We have also training and capacity building, mostly for national enforcement authorities. What is also interesting at ELA, we have information and services unit. For them, while for enforcement, the key stakeholders are national enforcement authorities. For the information unit, the key stakeholders are really directly workers and employers. So they are really working in order to raise awareness about workers' rights. They are working on seeing what are the needs from employers and how to help them. And probably in a way most directly facilitate intra-EU mobility in that more structural way. What we do in our unit, we do analytical work on labor mobility, but we also coordinate inspections. And before coming here, so I will now a bit focus maybe on the stopping abuses theme. Before coming here, I was looking at the statistics, and initially in the first years of establishment of ELA, most of our inspections focused on road transport and construction, and really majorly on posting within the construction sector. More recently, however, we also have had inspections focusing on intra-EU labor mobility. So to give you some numbers, in 2022, which we could count as a first somewhat kick-off year for inspections, we supported 34 concerted and joint inspections. Out of those 34, 27 were in road transport, so related to the mobility package, which is maybe in a way more straightforward to enforce because it contains weekly resting limits, it contains really substantive rules to enforce. Then in 2023, we supported already 75 concerted joint inspections, 32 in road transport, and 27 already in construction. So this was the year where we really branched out towards other sectors. And then in last year, in 2024, we supported 117 inspections. Out of those, 42 in road transport, 20 in construction, and 20, for example, focusing specifically on remuneration and wages, which is, I think, quite interesting, and as well quite few in sectors like HoReCa, inland waterways, and also some in sectors such as aviation. So which means basically the last year was the one where we really diversified what we do and where we also dealt more with intra-EU mobility issues. And when I was looking at some sort of statistics from our inspection supported, roughly 20, actually all the 3 years, 21% of those inspections dealt with mobile workers. Not all of them, I think, short term. And in 2023, during inspections, national authorities, supported by ELA, national authorities interviewed 597 mobile workers, and 2023, 582. So this rough number of 1/5 of our inspections are actually not about posted workers, are really about mobile workers. And what I wanted to maybe give a bit of an example of is when it comes to mobile intra-EU mobility, it is not always an easy task for national enforcement authorities. Because when you go on a spot, you check whether let's say, what is most straightforward, you check the working hours, you check whether the minimum wage is paid, you check what is happening, whether the OSH rules are obeyed. What is much more difficult and more complicated cases are when you have to really check whether the same level of wage has been paid in comparison to, let's say, this similar worker in the same undertaking, or that requires much more structural investigation. Those cases are often much longer and are also resource heavy. This is why I would say also for us, we have been now continuously working towards building our capacity to really also tackle these free movement cases. And when it comes to free movement of workers, we now have Fair HoReCa in the EU campaign running, which I think is which is majorly focusing on intra-EU labor mobility rather than posting as such. And we also work increasingly closely with free movement bodies and network in order to find ways how we as ELA can support enforcement in this area.
Thank you, Zarne. Staying in the construction sector, I will move now to Jonathan, whose trade union represents workers in that sector across Europe. So talking about risks of exploitation and bad conditions, would you be able to elaborate a bit on the forms thereof that we see in the construction sector, which where posting and mobility go hand in hand with large subcontracting chains?
Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think before I go into my diatribe, I think it's worth reiterating something that Joachim said, that we do recognize that intra-EU mobility is an essential freedom and often is a good opportunity for many people. However, in the context of construction, this becomes a bit more difficult. So when mobility combined with subcontracting, this creates really serious risks of exploitation. And the further down we go in the subcontracting chain, you find more posted workers, more TCNs, and posted workers, as you know, and even more so TCNs or especially vulnerable workers. And subcontracting chains create this kind of web of liability avoidance, and this has led to a situation in construction sites where the person who's instructing you will often be on a different side of the subcontracting chain. The person who you rely on to be paid, or who's paying your who's paying your firm who is being subcontracted, it becomes more and more difficult, which is why in the EFBWW we've long had a campaign for the last 3 years now on subcontracting, which we've called "Who's the Boss?" Because quite simply, no one knows who is the boss. What employers do as a result is they essentially outsource liability down the subcontracting chain, and leads to a situation where workers get trapped in precarity. And moreover, governments struggle to enforce this. Not only is it difficult within subcontracting chains itself, but also when you have multiple jurisdictions involved, it becomes even more difficult. Even where laws exist, laws are only as good as their enforcement. One example I will give is on this sheet of paper, is the Celessi case. So back in 2013, Celessi, you might not know them, but you might know their parent company, IREM. IREM is a notorious company in the construction sector, who was involved in the Lindsey oil refinery scandal, as well as Borealis accident in Antwerp. So Celessi and their parent company have form, so to say, in exploitation of workers. Back in 2013, Celessi was hired in Denmark to expand an oil terminal, and they systematically underpaid workers down the subcontracting chain, and despite being found guilty in the Danish courts, they refused, took it to Italy, where they went through the Italian court system, and it was only until 2024 that they finally, that justice was finally found. And in this case, it was quite lucky for the workers because the trade union 3F was able to provide the workers with their unpaid wages whilst seeking judicial action. So what this shows is enforcement takes place mainly at national level, and companies are more than incentivized to make this as complicated as possible. To reverse one thing that I know that Frederick says quite often, where you have no data, there must be no problems. I have to say that where you have more subcontracting, you have more problems. So yes, fraudulent subcontracting is extremely prevalent in the construction sector. Intra-EU mobility in the construction sector is becoming less about the free movement of people and more about the free movement of cheap labor. And Europe's employers in the construction sector have more than an appetite for this. So unless we have an honest conversation about how subcontracting is used to bypass responsibility, these problems will never be resolved and workers will continue to be exploited. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, also for sticking to the time. Sigrid, I come back to you. So I'll come back to the issue of risks and tensions that are related to intra-EU labor mobility. So the book has highlighted such risks. For example, the fact that intra-EU mobile workers tend to face, generally speaking, worse conditions than those employed in that country that have also been born in that country, despite their legal rights. And at the same time, there are tensions from the sending countries when we have the phenomenon of brain drain. Could you tell us a little bit more about these tensions and risks?
I think you know a lot about the tensions, and it's probably more going towards what could be done about them and how to position myself or potentially also the Commission. I think it's not straightforward and not easy. On the first hand, of course, I very much appreciate that Jonathan as well as Joachim have underlined that free movement is a workers' right and is one of the achievements of the Union, and that this is something which we should not give up and where also trade unions should not bend towards more protectionist perspectives. I think sometimes it is probably also by some members, there is in a way uncomfortable for some member states, but there is also a competition between socioeconomic conditions in one versus another member state. Yes, I would not take people moving away from a member state. I know in some cases a lot of people have left the respective country. Many of them actually come back after a while, and not few of them with good new ideas and providing actually new motivation to continue and to go on and to develop new ideas. It's also, if you look a bit closer, often more an issue of regional development in a sense that the urban agglomerations, the centers, attract people, whereas the rural countryside, so to say, loses people. This is a process which is actually ongoing far, far longer than the European Union. It has been taking place in other places all over Europe. It's something which has to be managed, for sure. And I think with a certain way, with the structural funds, with certain development schemes, member states, the Commission provides some support, and member states have opportunities to invest in regional development. And refusing people the right to move would be the wrong medicine in that respect. So that's a strong way, a strong element. And what else? I was also happy to hear from Joachim the idea of trade unions being the ear and the eye on the ground. And I think that is important. And there is not everything lovely at the ground, because I also think that part of this mechanism described by Jonathan is linked to very human nature, but it's bad. Segmentation. I am better off than you, and I'm better off perhaps because you are not so good off. And this happens partly at the workplace. And this segmentation and discrimination, it's always easy to say it should be ended when you are in a fairly comfortable position. But this is one element where we have a problem. And the awareness that the colleague next to me, irrespective where he comes from, is entitled to the same rights as me and should have the same rights. And if not, I go to my contact man, be it trade union representative, be it works council guy, and say, look, we have seen that also within member state, that a core company group, a core core employees are at the advantage compared to non-core employees. And this happens here again. And I am, not being a lawyer, I sometimes are fairly skeptic about the strength of the legal instruments to actually change the game here. I think we need to also change our mindset, and perhaps the fact that we have some labor shortages right now, and that is a means to actually encourage this change of mindset towards saying, hey guys, we deserve more or less equal, with differences. Well, I think that is the main line, and for the rest we should perhaps enter into the discussion. I'm a bit assumed that the colleagues to my left, right and left might disagree with me, but happy to discuss.
Thank you, Sigrid. Joachim, how do trade unions respond to risks involved to intra-EU labor mobility, and what are the best ways to protect workers, mobile workers?
Thank you. I'll pick up where I left in the last round and give a few examples of what the EU can do to help mobile workers, because we want labor mobility to contribute to quality jobs. But we also do see that some of the problems stem from the EU legal framework, and that's where we need to address them accordingly. So the unions are supportive of the EU internal market, and looking at the word protectionism, I would say that we are not here to protect the borders, but we protect the workers, and that is how we approach this issue. Then what can the European Union do to help the unions? Well, I mentioned the important work that trade unions do on the ground, and the Commission is currently in the process of reflecting on the EU multi-annual framework for the coming 7 years, and looking at the close to 100 million euros annually spent on supporting businesses on cross-border mobility issues through the European Enterprise Network, Solvit, etc. It would be very much appreciated to also have a few million euros earmarked for supporting this important work that trade unions do on the ground in counseling mobile workers, because the EU is quite good at encouraging free movement of workers, but when workers encounter problems, which is not always. Many cases mobility go very well, but in those cases where you do encounter problems, you are often quite alone. And this is why we need this on the ground counseling and legal support networks as a safety net. But we also do need to fill the gaps where these exist. And to improve enforcement. Jonathan has mentioned the issue of subcontracting and the need to regulate that at EU level, because that is an issue where the problems stem from the use of economic freedom, so freedom to provide services, freedom of establishment, which sometimes is used to circumvent labor laws or collective agreements. And it poses enforcement hurdles both for the inspectorates in long subcontracting chains, but also for the workers to claim their rights, be aware of their rights, or even who their employer is. So if we are serious also about this narrative around simplification in the European Union and making sure that it actually delivers not only in the interest of business, but also in the interest of citizens, and perhaps also in the interest of public authorities, we should a little bit clean up in subcontracting chains, for example. Making it easier to inspect, making it easier to claim your rights. We also need to work on more digital enforcement tools. This is really key if we want to improve cross-border cooperation, such as ELA, but beyond. And here, recently, the Commission has tabled a proposal for an e-declaration on posting, which has a certain potential in improving these types of cross-border cooperation and enforcement. But from the ETUC side, I must say that we do feel that this has this proposal has primarily been designed with the simplification of business in mind, rather than actually making sure that labor inspectorates who already have very limited resources and who already struggle to enforce workers' rights in cross-border situations actually have access to the information they need. We also have, at the moment, still ongoing the social security coordination rules and revision of the EU legal framework, where once again we see this argument that maybe there could be exceptions to the prior notification of social security certificates for posted workers. Because it's burdensome for business. And I think we should really once again remind ourselves that this is about the protection of the workers and quite marginal costs for the employers. And reducing the protection of workers is not what's gonna build European competitiveness. On the contrary, it might cost much more in terms of social risks and long-term costs for society in terms of more abuse, more accidents at work, more hurdles for labor inspectorates to enforce the rights, and so on. So all of this said, cross-border cooperation is important. We don't protect the borders, we protect the workers, and for this, we think that the European Labour Authority has really demonstrated its added value in the past few years, but we also see the need to, so to say, adjust the mandate, strengthen it a bit, sharpen some of the tools in the toolbox. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joachim. Zane, ELA carries out different analysis of intra-EU mobility. As you mentioned, you're not directly involved in policy making. Can you share some further key findings from this analysis and link them to what we have heard here today?
Sure, I will try. So basically at ELA, we do two types of analysis. We do operational analysis, which is something public doesn't really see because that is a targeted service for the national enforcement authorities, but that's something relevant. Also sometimes accessible to social partner organizations, possibly through our mechanisms. And then we do strategic analysis. That is something you can find on our website and see. At the same time, our analytical work is, I guess, a little bit specific and different from, general research institutes and other EU institutions such as actors such as Eurofund. First, we always focus on enforcement of labor mobility and social security coordination rules and it is always also our analytical work is somewhat more operational in character. We work with different kinds of stakeholders, so our analytical work is aimed more towards national enforcement authorities and aspects, and maybe we also get a better access to national enforcement authorities as our data source and informant in those that analytical work, which is important to remember. And then finally, we also use our analytical work then to potentially target our activities such as information campaigns, but also inspections very specifically. So this is important to remember. When it comes to strategic analysis, I think two sort of major themes which I heard today was the lack of data, and I know that it can be difficult also for in our work as ELA to distinguish and to get the numbers when it comes to really specific labor mobility issues especially in sectorial context in the way which matches maybe the legal instruments in our mandate. So this is sometimes I know that we struggle with that. So the data issue is a bit horizontal. And then, I mean, what we also see, but we also see a bit of as ELA, we often see the bleaker picture, right? Because we often see, especially through inspections and also when we talk to enforcement authorities, they also naturally see the problematic cases, the really infringements, etc. And in that sense, maybe we also see quite a lot of issues with working conditions, etc. But that's also the nature of both our analytical and operational work. And what we have done, I think, maybe in contrast a little bit to the book, in our analytical work, we have really taken a sectorial focus so far. So we had a report dedicated to the construction sector, now recently HoReCa. We will have now 2 reports coming shortly out in social security coordination, which are much more horizontal, but still, with a specific focus. One on fraud and another one on digital tools used by national enforcement authorities, which is quite interesting. And we also will have a dedicated report which will be launched next week on third country national posting and contracting chains in specific case study countries, which is something also I think quite interesting. And what we see there, we also see that things can change over time when it comes to enforcement, and labor shortages seem to be very linked to how things are on the ground. Let's say the road transport sector. For example, for the TCN report from the field work, it was clear that some years ago, the drivers, when they were hired into the EU labor market, often paid for their visas, recruitment costs, etc. But now, because of the shortages in the sector, this is not a common phenomena anymore. So these conditions can improve when there is better labor matching. And yes, I think that's something I wanted to raise. And when it comes to maybe facilitated what kind of work we are interested in is first is the sectorial work, but also regional one. Because what we see quite a lot in terms of specific inspections, they often concern specific labor flows from one member state to another, and specific and quite serious breaches and infringements in those sectorial plus regional contexts.
Thank you, Zanne. So I have one final question for Jonathan for this panel stage of this meeting. So what would be your recommendations for allowing workers to make the most of intra-EU labor mobility, but at the same time protecting them from abuses and excesses?
So I think you can probably already tell what I'm going to say. But yeah, as I would say, like, if we do want intra-EU mobility to work for everyone, not just companies looking for cheap labor, then we do need proper, stronger protections for workers. And to invoke the former Prime Minister Tony Blair of the UK, when he said we need education, education, and education, I would say what we need is inspections, inspections, and inspections. Anyway, so Sigrid came up with a comment about legislation and legal solutions and not being convinced that these could be appropriate tools, or you're not convinced that they might be effective. But I would say that in the Commission report on the implementation and the monitoring of the Posting of Workers Directive, they did identify limitation of subcontracting and banning labour-only agencies in the context of posting as good practices. And I think this is something that we should extend beyond the few countries that do that. And it's very clear, at least in the construction sector, that a European approach is really required. There's ambiguity right now when things go wrong. Liability is not only, as I said before, distributed legally across the subcontracting chain, but also geographically across different jurisdictions, as I demonstrated in the Salesi case. But how do we keep the benefits whilst stopping exploitation, I hear you ask. So first of all, we need to promote direct and quality jobs first and foremost as the norm. That's what we should be aiming for all the time. And secondly, I would say the EFBWW campaign on limiting subcontracting is the way that we should go. Maybe I'm biased. Limiting it to one or in exceptional circumstances 2 tiers. There'll be many reasons why that would be, but you would need extra checks on why you would go to a second tier below, and I think that should be bolstered by collective bargaining agreements. Secondly, and I think one thing that is extremely important to have as well is full chain liability. At the moment, main contractors either honestly or willfully either dishonestly or willfully ignorant, have no idea about violations further down their chain, and therefore we find it hard to find justice there. And thirdly, I'll leave it with this third one, is stronger enforcement in general. As I say, more inspections, but obviously also solidarity with the workers. But we can introduce things like more digital tools such as social ID cards. Digital company registers would also be a good addition there. Make inspections quicker, faster and more efficient, and be able to root out where there are problems. Sanctions need to be more dissuasive. The issue with the Flamanville case a few years ago was that not only did it take forever to come to a conclusion, but the fine that they got in the end when they exploited all these workers in subcontracting chains ended up to just be 30,000 euros. Another thing would be strengthening the power of Ella. I think everyone on here wants to see Ella do more and better things. And introduce things like an observatory, and what we would want is a specific unit in Ella to look at the construction sector and be able to suggest the best policies to tackle the unique problems in the construction sector. Is that good? Does that answer your question?
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. So now we have another 10 minutes, perhaps a little bit more, to open the floor to the audience, to collect questions for our panelists. The gentleman here, I suggest any other volunteers? Well, go ahead, please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, my name is Michael Freitag, work of Europe, work of the employment industry, part of temporary agency work at European level of the employers. So a bit in a different camp here. But I would like to pick up what Joachim Bettmann said earlier on quality jobs and mobility. We fully agree. We fully agree there needs to be quality jobs and mobility. And we actually published today a paper showing how HR services and agency work can provide quality jobs in general, looking at the roadmap that's coming up later this year. But for doing so, I think on mobility, there are at least 3 main elements that are important, and which I would like to have the comments from the panelists who are interested to comment. The first one is compliance and enforcement, really key, also for agency work. The second one is a strong involvement of social partners. In our sector, we have a tradition of addressing mobility in collective labor agreements, especially in Holland. And the third one is information exchange and best practice sharing. And here we are currently doing a project within Europa on raising awareness, capacity building on mobility and migration and collective bargaining. So happy to hear your feedback on this contribution and on the role of agency work in mobility.
Anyone else? I have a question on the issue of social security systems coordination. You mentioned that, Sigrid. Could you tell us a little bit more about the barriers to that? I mean, I'm asking as someone coming from a country that has faced in the last decade quite a serious brain drain problem. And despite what you said that people do come back with good ideas, well, they don't. And that means not only an economic problem for the country is Greece, in case it was not clear from my surname. So the problem is not just economic, it's also societal, because you know, the social security system there faces quite serious challenges with the sort of the more productive and a big part of the labor force having moved out, and you know, the remaining aging population not being able to have access to, you know, pensions that would be adequate, and even long-term care from the families. So what are the main problems for? I understand that this is you know, a member state's competence of the Commission. There's so much they can do, but I have a suspicion that this is, I mean, Greece is only one of the member states that has faced that in recent years. I mean, talking about agglomeration forces and, you know, areas that are not necessarily rural, but you can also see it in European peripheries being left behind and having populations without much prospects gives rise to other phenomena that I think, yeah, we will have to we are coming to terms with at the moment in Europe and even across the Atlantic. Anyone else? I think that would, yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Pierre Gossens. I'm active in the Belgian Union, and I'm particularly concerned with implementing workers' rights for those mobile workers. And I noticed that in Belgium, labor inspections focus on some sectors for those mobile workers, but keep a blind eye on some other sectors. I think mainly of computer scientists, but it's also for plane pilots and also for nurses, where workers' rights are not respected. They are provided through brokers, often located in other countries, and very few is done so as they have the same rights as local workers. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so should we go again with the order that you have intervened for any answers to any of the questions, and any final points you would like to make? I would say 2 minutes each so that we roughly stay within time. Sigrid, would you like to start?
Well, I can start. Let's put it like that. You have, of course, asked a difficult question. And I don't have the figures right now. One would have to get back to the figures. I think even to Greece, a number of people actually return upon retirement. And in returning, they, of course, take their pension with them. So the pension is then transferred from Belgium, the Netherlands, to Greece, and increases there the purchasing power, and brings money basically in the economic circle. And also, while they have been working abroad, they have probably transferred money. So this is a sort of mechanism which I think is not particularly well analyzed. I haven't looked into it so far, but I think we have to look into it to really assess a full balance. Having said we have not looked into it means also I will not be able to give you a comprehensive, full-fledged answer. And normally, I don't know, it depends a bit on the member state situation. We have this we have this claim of united in diversity, which of course says that each member state has its own social security system. And in some member states, you have to pay for the health insurance, even when you are a pensioner. In others, probably not, which of course means a difference in terms of how is the financing of the system. And yeah, I understand that member states have major difficulties to actually find a way, because whoever considers himself a net contributor or a net beneficiary, this is a difficult discussion, which my understanding, although I'm not an expert, I know of other people who are more expert than me. I think this is a discussion which has to take place, and I would not hesitate to also, as I said, invoke the benefits of structural funds to find a right balance. And as I also pointed out, it's also a regional phenomenon. Probably the phenomenon is not that much of a problem in Athens, but it's a big problem on the Peloponnese, where you have basically, it could be, if you are a bit nasty and provocative, you could say it's an old folks home, en total. Yeah. A quick thing, I hope you can say something on labor inspections in some sectors, not in others. I think the Belgians are not the weakest in terms of, perhaps also Sana will be able to say something. The Belgians are not the weakest in terms of labor inspectorates. They have, as far as I'm aware, they have quite good capacities. They are quite well set up in their system. Other member states are, and it is national competence at that point. We cannot, I don't see that the Commission has anywhere a possibility to directly influence and say a labor inspectorate should at least have X staff compared to, but in the end it boils down to exactly that, what you ask. We should have a benchmark in terms of that, and so many labor inspectorates are needed per, and en plus, a sort of strategy at the national level that this is not just, well, we do something here, we do something there. Here you also see huge differences between national level inspectorates. And yeah, united in diversity, I would say.
Thank you. Joachim?
Thank you. Should I refer to another EU motto? For economic freedoms does not mean that labor workers, as one of those four freedoms, can be subject to the same logic as other factors of production that can be negotiated or compromised for the lowest price or the highest profit. I think this is very clear. We are talking about people, and there needs to be a certain standard of decency. That requires, on the one hand, as we have noted, ambitious social policies, but also making sure that economic freedoms cannot unconditionally be relied on. I want to mention the freedom or to stay as coined by Enrico Letta in his report on the future of the internal market. Not in the sense that it's about labor mobility, actually. It's rather the other side of the coin. What he's saying is not that we need less mobility. He says that the staying should always be an option. And I think that concerns mobility across borders as well as within a country. And what does he mean by that is essentially that in order to have prospects and opportunities where you are born and where you want to live, it means that there needs to be good quality jobs, but also affordable public services or housing, education, care, infrastructure, and so on. This is the right to stay, and if we don't focus on this, it also will mean more fragmentation of the internal market or more polarization, leading to more inequalities, not only between workers, but also between regions. So this is very important to bear in mind. And once again, we need quality jobs in every sector, every region. And this means also direct employment, not flexible employment that once again flows according to supply and demand as if there was an invisible hand. No, we are talking about people. There needs to be a certain threshold of decency. If we talk about posting, for example, the core business of a company cannot be posting without any economic activity. Then it's a shell company, then it's a letterbox company. And we do see these kind of problems linked to, for example, the posting of third country nationals, which is a particularly vulnerable group. On the issue of labor inspections, I mean, it's a real problem. There needs to be targets, but also for the moment, like, we also need to use the existing very limited, unfortunately, resources in the best possible extent way possible. And this is why we are particularly concerned when it comes about reducing information access of labor inspectors, because they need this information to better target inspections with the limited resources they have. But ideally, of course, more resources, because we shouldn't forget that in addition to all these other public services I mentioned, labor inspection is a public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Joachim. Zane?
Thank you. I will pick up maybe on two questions. One on the labor intermediaries, because this is something we see, especially in our operational work and inspections. When it comes to construction sector, I think approximately every second case involves some sort of a labor intermediation somewhere. We obviously see complex cases quite a lot, and cross-border cases, and that is a prevalent issue to tackle. And what we are planning, planning in the future, we will do some sort of strategic analysis on labor intermediaries, and then also focus on that more in our operational work. At the same time, obviously, which is I think the biggest strength, but also sometimes can be a bit challenging, is that we are demand-based authority. So member states come to us with a proposal for inspection. We do not have own investigative powers as such. We have limited ability to process data and many other challenges. And the member states are in the driving seat on issues. And this is to answer the second question on targeting of inspections. I think we have some means, and very soft approaches how we do facilitate carrying out of inspections in highly complex sectors. And we have had actually first inspections supported by ELA in aviation sector, for example, which used to be a sector where cross-border inspections didn't really take place, right? And we are working towards facilitating more and more inspections in those types of complex sectors with cross-border element. We are trying to do that. At the same time, of course, everything is resource dependent. So we also cannot, if member state has to invest incredible amount of resources to carry out inspections in this complex sector, and then instead they have to reallocate resources from straightforward sectors with a lot of problems as well, that can also become challenging. So that is always up to the member states to decide what they do. When it comes to EU standards, we do not have typically standards for inspections, except in road transport, where we have some quota for checks. So this is something, obviously, I think also the reason why the first sector where very successful cooperation took place and this cross-border enforcement level was the road transport. And yes, this is something I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Zane. Jonathan, final points?
There's really not much more that I can add, but I can get on my soapbox again if you want. I think the real choice for workers, and this is really just paraphrasing what Joachim, but I wrote it down before he said it. It should not be between. The choice for workers should be between decent work at home or mobility as a positive choice. What we have at the moment is poor jobs at home and mobility because wages and protection are too low. And what we have at the moment is that intra-EU mobility is being exploited as a loophole for wage dumping. In the construction sector specifically, it's really suffering from a attractivity problem, and this is not going to be solved if we continue the way that we are with employers using tactics and, of course, large multinational corporations. And of course, this also has knock-on effects to social cohesion, and this results in worse politics. And the politics that we're seeing today, I have to say, are not going to result in better conditions for workers or indeed society at large. So, thank you very much on that pleasant note.
Thank you very much. to the panelists of this session, to the editors of the book, to the contributors for delivering their chapters. I hope this has been as interesting and useful as it has been for you as it has been for me. And please join me in a round of applause for everyone who has contributed to the book and to the event today.
Thank you very much.